For thousands of years, really, humans have tried to figure out society, why civilizations rise, why they fall. What if someone, centuries ago, hit on some answers that still ring true?
It's a compelling thought. And today we're looking into just that with the Muqaddimah, an introduction to history by Ibn Khaldun.
Quite a foundational text.
Absolutely. It's incredibly comprehensive, covers everything from royal power, making a living, the sciences, crafts, just profound insights into how societies work and change over time.
And for anyone listening who wants to grasp these big ideas without getting lost in, well, a massive historical text.
Exactly. Think of this exploration a bit like the Mindful Moments YouTube channel. They use AI analysis to break down books and really spark thought. Our aim here is similar. Extract key insights from this major work, get you thinking critically.
Okay, let's dive in. Ibn Khaldun saw humans as distinct. What set us apart in his view?
Well, first and foremost, our ability to think. This capacity for sciences, for crafts, it all stems from that power of reflection and reason.
Unlike animals acting purely on instinct.
Precisely. He contrasts us with creatures like bees or locusts. Their complex societies seem driven by, let's call it inspiration or instinct. Humans, though, need more.
Which leads to his second point, right? The need for some kind of authority or restraining influence.
Yes. Because we can think and choose, we also have the capacity for aggression toward each other. So, unlike animals guided purely by instinct, we need rules, laws, government, some authority to maintain order.
Makes sense. Without it, chaos.
Indeed. Then there's the drive to make a living, acquire sustenance, a fundamental human need.
Seems pretty universal.
He saw it as a divinely inspired drive shaping much of our activity.
So our intellect, need for order, need for sustenance, it all points towards what?
Civilization itself. The necessity of living together. We need communities for companionship, yes, but also for cooperation. It's how we meet our complex needs, pool our labor and skills.
He saw two main types.
That's right. Bedouin or desert civilization and sedentary or urban civilization.
Right.
And understanding the dynamics between these is key to his analysis.
Now, when he approached history, he wasn't just collecting dates and names.
No, far from it. He was searching for the inner meaning of history. He saw it almost as a branch of philosophy.
Meaning?
Meaning involves speculation, seeking truth, really understanding the causes of events, the how and why, not just listing what happened.
So a deeply critical approach then.
Very critical.
Yeah.
He took issue with earlier historians, accusing many of just passing on untrue gossip or nonsensical stories.
Why? What was their failing?
He felt it was often blind trust in tradition, a lack of critical analysis. They didn't examine the plausibility of accounts or the reliability of sources. He really emphasized needing a critical eye.
Though he did respect some, right?
Oh, yes. He singled out a few like Ibn Ishaq at Tabari, but he considered them rare exceptions.
He uses some great examples to show this critical method in action, like the story about the Tobas raids.
Ah, yes. A perfect case study. He questions this huge claimed conquest of like Turkestan and Tibet by an ancient Yemeni king.
On what grounds?
Practical grounds. Geography, logistics. How would an army travel that far? Where would they get food? What about the nations in between? He insists on checking stories against sound norms, basically. Common sense and known facts.
It's a very modern-sounding approach, really. Checking the evidence.
It is. And he does something similar with a Quranic verse about Iram.
Another story that got embellished.
Hugely. Commentators like at-Tabari and others reported tales of Shaddad building this incredible paradise-like city, Iram, which was then destroyed. Ibn Khaldun was deeply skeptical of these accounts, seeing them as rooted in baseless assumptions.
So constantly pushing back against unverified tradition.
Exactly. He wanted history grounded in reason and plausible evidence.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. He also observed patterns related to geography and civilization.
He did. He noted that generally there was more civilization in the northern part of the inhabited world compared to the southern.
And he had a reason for that.
He attributed it primarily to climate, suggesting that excessive heat in the far south might hinder the development of complex societies.
And within the more temperate zones?
There, he saw that the middle zones, his third and fourth cultivated zones, tended to have denser populations, more cities, more developed land compared to the zones near the extremes, like the first and second.
He even tentatively linked environment to human traits.
Yes, though he was cautious about it. He suggested perhaps that people in harsher, more marginal regions might develop a certain alertness or sharpness due to needing less food and moisture, maybe, while sedentary populations with abundant food might tend towards dullness, but again presented very much as a suggestion.
Interesting. This connects back to his idea about needing restraint for social order. How does that work in different settings?
Well, in cities, that restraint comes mainly from government, from laws and rulers, formal structures.
And in the desert, among the Bedouin.
There, it's more about respected figures, sheikhs, leaders, but crucially, it relies on what he calls Asabiyyah.
Group feeling, that powerful bond.
Exactly. That sense of solidarity usually is common descent, kinship. It provides mutual support, defense. It's the glue holding tribal society together. He uses the story of Joseph's brothers as an example of that strength in numbers and shared identity.
And lacking that group feeling makes you vulnerable.
Extremely vulnerable, especially in the harsh conditions of the desert. It affects everything: safety, the ability to establish authority, even prophecy, according to him.
And this Asabiyyah is central to his theory of dynasties, particularly when combined with religion.
Absolutely central. Religion, he argued, could massively amplify group feeling, providing a powerful unifying ideology and a justification for leadership. The early Islamic expansion is his prime example, faith providing discipline and common purpose. He even quotes Rustam, the Persian general, marveling at the Muslims' ordered prayer.
But if that religious fervor fades,
Then, he believed, the group feeling weakens, political leadership falters, and the group might revert to a more fragmented or savage state, even if they previously held power.
so even if a desert group conquers a settled area,
Their rule might be short-lived or even destructive if they lack the cohesion or the structures needed to maintain a complex civilization. They might overwhelm a weak dynasty, but struggle to govern effectively long-term.
which reinforces his view of urban life being ultimately superior.
Yes, in terms of potential development. Cities offer more necessities, more specialized crafts, a higher potential for wealth and complexity. Desert life, while fostering certain virtues like hardiness, is inherently limited in its resources. Bedouins often struggled to adapt to city demands unless they already had significant wealth.
You know, this whole process of digging into Ibn Khaldun's framework, understanding the why behind social structures, it feels very much in the spirit of the deeper analysis you find on platforms like Mindful Moments, and indeed in explorations like ours here through these podcasts. It's about getting past the surface level.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
And this connects directly to his ideas about prosperity. How does civilization actually generate wealth?
How did he see that working?
Quite straightforwardly, actually. Abundant civilization means large populations, extensive labor. This leads to greater production, surplus goods, which in turn creates wealth.
And that benefits everyone.
Well, potentially. It benefits the populace through available goods and opportunities, and it benefits the ruling dynasty through increased tax revenues and, therefore, greater authority and power. He points to places like Egypt and Syria, historically wealthy regions, as examples.
Makes sense. Prosperity fuels more development, like architecture.
Right. Architecture isn't just about shelter. It's a sign of a thriving society, reflecting the ambitions of rulers, the skill of artisans. He notes its prominence in temperate zones and even discusses different building techniques using stones, bricks, or the Asabiyyah method with earth and lime. Shows the ingenuity involved.
His scope was so wide, he even touches on things like birth without midwifery.
Yes, briefly. He considers unusual births, sometimes framing them as miraculous, like prophets born circumcised, or sometimes just as instinctual, similar to animals. He mentions the common instinct of a baby seeking the breast as innate guidance.
And this challenged some philosophical views.
It did. He questioned philosophers like Al-Farabi, who argued that certain crafts, like midwifery, were so essential that their disappearance, and thus human extinction, was impossible. Ibn Khaldun brought in divine will and other possibilities.
He also compared city and desert life in terms of health.
He did. He observed city diets were often richer, more complex, maybe with too many ingredients, potentially leading to imbalance and illness. This, combined with what he saw as corrupt city air from waste and less physical activity.
Compared to the desert.
Compared the simpler, plainer diet and purer air and more active lifestyle of desert dwellers, he concluded desert people generally had better health and less need for physicians.
Moving into the realm of knowledge itself, he valued writing.
Highly. Calligraphy, the craft of writing, he saw as noble, second only to speech itself for conveying thoughts across time and space.
And he examined specific Islamic sciences, like hadith studies.
Yes, the science of tradition. Its noble purpose, he explained, was to preserve and critically authenticate the sayings and actions attributed to Prophet Muhammad, figuring out what was reliable. He mentions key centers and figures like Imam Malik and al-Bukhari,
And jurisprudence, or fiqh?
defined as knowing God's laws concerning human actions, what's obligatory, forbidden, recommended, etc., derived primarily from the Quran and Sunnah. He also acknowledged that differences in interpretation were inevitable.
He also waded into philosophy of science in a way, questioning secondary causes.
Yes, influenced by theological debates. He acknowledged that we see apparent cause and effect of fire burns, water cools, but argued the true nature of that influence is unknown, ultimately stemming from God, the first cause. He suggested focusing on the causer of all causes.
Interesting. And perception.
He touched on different levels: sensory, intellectual, spiritual, suggesting perception's intensity varies. He even mentioned al-Ghazali's view that the soul retains perceptive abilities after death.
What about Sufism?
He described it as a science within Islamic law, originating from the early Muslims' focus on devotion, asceticism, and seeking closeness to God, which later became more formalized as worldly distractions increased.
And Kalam, speculative theology.
That arose, he explained, to defend the articles of faith using rational arguments and proofs. He noted different phases, from early theologians setting basic principles to later figures like al-Ghazali integrating more formal logic.
Physics, too.
Defined as the study of physical bodies, motion, rest, celestial, terrestrial, atmospheric phenomena. He acknowledged Aristotle's influence via translations during al-Mamun's era, and later thinkers like Avicenna and Averroes.
How were these intellectual sciences, often from Greek sources, received initially?
With some friction. Al-Mamun encouraged translation, but many religious scholars were initially wary, seeing potential conflicts with Islamic law.
But that changed.
Over time, yes. Figures like Al-Farabi, Avicenna, and particularly Averroes in Spain worked to integrate these sciences, especially logic, seeing them as compatible with, or even supportive of, faith. Though he notes a later decline of these sciences in North Africa and Spain compared to the East.
He also covers sciences based on numbers.
Right, arithmetic understanding, number, properties, progressions, like calculating sums of series. Basic but fundamental.
And logic. You mentioned it became more accepted.
Yes. Initially strongly disapproved of by many early religious scholars, logic eventually gained acceptance, particularly after al-Ghazali argued for its utility as a tool to ensure sound reasoning, even in religious matters, helping distinguish truth from falsehood.
What about more esoteric fields like alchemy?
Ah, alchemy. The supposed craft of turning base metals into gold or silver. He was quite skeptical. He noted the secrecy, the puzzling language used by figures like Jabir ibn Hayyan.
Suggesting it wasn't just a straightforward technical skill.
Exactly. He leans towards viewing it, if real at all, as perhaps some kind of spiritual influence, divine grace, or maybe even sorcery rather than a natural craft. Alchemists themselves tried hard to distance it from forbidden sorcery.
Did he think it worked?
He doubted it strongly on practical grounds. If a genuine method existed, why wasn't it common knowledge? Why hadn't someone succeeded definitively? He dismisses analogies comparing the philosopher's stone, the elixir, to something simple like yeast.
What about astrology, predicting the future from the stars?
Another area he examines critically. He defines it as trying to infer earthly events from celestial configurations based on belief in planetary influences.
Different kinds.
Yes. Judicial astrology predicting specific events for individuals or states, and natural astrology, studying more general celestial influences. Acceptance varied widely, with many religious scholars rejecting it as interfering with divine will or leading people astray.
Did he mention specific astrological predictions?
He touches on the idea of great conjunctions, planets being used to forecast major shifts, like the rise and fall of dynasties or religions, citing practitioners like Al-Kindi and others who made such long-range predictions.
And dreams. How did he interpret those?
As perceptions of the soul when the physical senses are quiet during sleep. He thought they could be influenced by bodily states, lingering thoughts, or sometimes be a form of true guidance or inspiration, especially for prophets or very pious people.
People have always wanted to know the future. Did he discuss other methods besides astrology?
Yes. He acknowledged the human desire and mentioned practices like soothsaying, divination, geomancy, and particularly what's called letter magic, or ilm el-huruf.
Letter magic, what's that?
It's a complex system based on the belief that the letters of the alphabet, especially Arabic, hold secret numerical values and inherent properties, relationships to elements, planets, etc. By manipulating these letters and numbers through specific calculations and arrangements.
You could predict things or achieve effects.
That was the claim, revealing hidden knowledge, solving problems, influencing events. He mentions figures associated with it, like Maslama al-Madriti and al-Buni, and complicated techniques involving number squares and calculations based on names or Quranic verses.
Sounds intricate.
Very. But he distinguishes the limited, temporary effects claimed for letter magic from the transformative power claimed, however doubtfully, for alchemy.
Shifting back to more practical matters, what about education?
Crucial. He stresses the importance, especially in Muslim cities, of instructing children in the Quran from a young age. He saw this as foundational, instilling faith and providing a basis for all later learning, because early lessons take deep root.
And the Arabic language itself, he saw a golden age.
Definitely. During the Umayyad and Abbasid periods, he argues, Arabic language proficiency, especially in poetry, reached a peak because the language was dominant and deeply ingrained. He points to works like the Kitab al-Aghani as proof of this rich cultural expression.
But it declined later.
He observed a decline as non-Arab dynasties rose to power and other languages gained prominence. The linguistic milieu changed.
He also discusses rhetoric and poetry styles.
Yes, distinguishing between rhymed, metered poetry and prose. He notes the development of rhetorical figures to embellish speech, but also mentions that the best speakers valued naturalness over excessive, forced ornamentation. He even shares an anecdote about a scholar wishing punishment on those who overuse such figures.
Poetry held a special place for Arabs, didn't it?
Historically, immense significance. It was their primary archive, recording history, genealogy, wisdom, ethics. Great poets were celebrated, their works potentially even displayed at the Kaaba, though he notes high-ranking rulers generally considered actively composing poetry beneath their station.
Does he give examples of poetry he admired?
Yes, he quotes evocative lines from poets like Al-Mutamid ibn Abbad of Seville and others from Al-Andalus, praising their natural comparisons and linguistic skill. He also includes examples from North Africa, like a poem expressing love and another by a poet named Al-Kafif describing a military campaign, highlighting its excellent opening. So you see, Ibn Khaldun's exploration in the Muqaddimah is just incredibly vast. It covers the very foundations of society, how we study the past, social dynamics, group feeling, the rise and fall of power, economics, all these different sciences and arts.
It really does cover so much ground, and what strikes me is how much of it still feels relevant. These core ideas about social cohesion, the cycles of power, the importance of critical thinking, they still give us frameworks for understanding our own world centuries later.
Absolutely. His observations on how societies function, how knowledge is pursued and sometimes lost, the interplay between different ways of life they offer enduring perspectives, it really pushes you to think about the bigger picture.
Which leaves us with a thought, perhaps. Within this grand sweep of history that Ibn Khaldun described, this ongoing cycle of civilization, what is our own role? What are the things that truly last, and why?
A profound question to ponder. What constitutes lasting value across generations?
Indeed. Well, if this exploration has spiked your interest, please do subscribe so you don't miss future discussions. Share it with anyone you think might find Ibn Khaldun's ideas valuable.
And if you want to tackle the source itself, we'll include a link where you can find the Muqaddimah. It's a rewarding, though substantial read.
And finally, perhaps most importantly, keep questioning, keep thinking critically about the world and the information you encounter. Thanks for joining us.